Hello, I'm Stuart Craner. Welcome to this session, which is part of 3 days of webinars venturing into the ecosystem future. I'm Director of the Business Ecosystem Alliance, and we're delighted once again to be partnering with the Higher Model Institute on this virtual event exploring the very latest thinking and best practice in the field of business ecosystems. Our 10 sessions feature some of the leading lights in thinking and practice, including Jim Moore, Liz Altman, Michael Jacobides, Kai Krippendorf, and Andrea Cates. All of the sessions will be available after the event. We're excited that people from more than 50 countries worldwide have signed up for these sessions. So welcome to you, wherever you are joining from. Please send in your comments, thoughts, questions, and queries at any time during the sessions. In our final session, we are joined by the co-authors of Co-Innovation Platforms, a playbook for enabling innovation and ecosystem growth, Tammy Madsen and David Cruickshank. Tammy and David are going to present their ideas, and then we're going to have a Q&A. So welcome, Tammy and David, and over to you.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you again for inviting us. We're thrilled to be here. And hello to everyone, and thank you for joining from wherever location you're at. Today, we're going to be sharing some findings from our work on co-innovation platforms. And this model originated at SAP. David was the orchestrator of the first platform that was created there for a focus on co-innovation in the Palo Alto location that subsequently was replicated in 15 other locations around the world. This gave us an opportunity to examine over 1,500 co-innovation projects from between 2008 and 2020, I would say. And we took a deep dive into those projects, into some of those projects, I'd say a sample of them. And we interviewed a number of co-innovation partners from both Fortune 500 companies to small startups, and that informed our work. So let me go ahead and get started. We're going to start with some general forms of platforms and ecosystem to sort of show a bit about how this co-innovation model is slightly different. Then we'll shift on to starting points about, well, if you're going to pursue an ecosystem play, where do you start? And then conclude with strategic choices around governance and orchestration. So we're all familiar with these different systems, right? So transaction platforms, certainly a matchmaker platform, Uber connecting drivers and riders, Airbnb connecting renters and hosts, very much a volume play focused on network effects, right? So that's tends to be that approach. In the innovation platform space, we're seeing sort of a slightly different model, much more strategically driven in the sense of less about volume in many of these cases and more about what's the focus of innovation, what's the direction of innovation that we're heading in. And so two examples here are Cisco's innovation centers in Europe, where they're working with regional and global partners to create new technology to address industry pain points. And then, of course, the second example is SAP's co-innovation platform. And let me just give you an illustration of what that looks like. In this context, two partners might come in, they have a problem they're needing to solve. They could not get sufficient resources at their home organizations, or they didn't have the time or had a lower priority there. So they're seeking a way to address or tackle a short-term project. If that project or proposal aligns with the strategic objectives of the platform and its parent organization, the platform then approves that project and starts to work with those partners to figure out how can we build mutual trust, how can we set up a simple contract for the project, and then identifying a whole host of resources, both demand-side services as well as supply-side services, so digital and physical resources to enable that project to go forward. The value that's created from that co-innovation project gets equitably distributed. So the partners capture the value they create. They, of course, share that with their customers, and the platform benefits because there's an additional utility that's added beyond its core offerings. What's distinctive here from this model is this approach to sort of equitable value distribution, as well as the provisioning of both physical resources as well as digital resources on the supply side to enable the execution of the co-innovation projects, and on the demand side to build awareness and launch. The third category here is integrated model, and the obvious examples here are iOS and Android, where we're looking at they provide both functionality, both the transaction function as well as innovation on the part of complements creating apps for those platforms. When we think about the ecosystem space, I'm using a bit of more of an academic definition here, but we're really looking at a collective of very different types of actors that have varying degrees of interdependent, unique complementary relationships, and none of them are under the hierarchical control of your organization, right? So it makes it sort of a bit challenging. let me give you an example here. We think about this multilateral piece and this interdependency and why is it important? If on the illustration here is a 5-sided network formed around the Android platform. Now, just imagine if you pull a player out of this system, what happens to the total value that's created by the system? What happens to the value that can be created by each actor? And what damage is done to value capture or value distribution within the system? So in this way, when we think about ecosystems, they are not portfolios of partnerships. They're also not supply chains. In this context, we're really looking at a system where the value is greater, created by the system is greater than the sum of the parts, right? So there's all these interactions. The complementary unique relationships here, these unique complementary relationships, if you will, we want them to be distinctive, something that's creating new sources of value for the system as a whole. Let me give you 2 examples. One is a co-innovation project that we looked at when we were working on the book. And this is a German dairy cooperative in the Black Forest. And it wanted to provide more transparency to its customers about its milk products. But it's a dairy cooperative, so it wasn't immersed in digital technology. Through the platform, they were connected with a digital consultancy who had digital twin technology and was very keen on applying that in a new context. The solution here was each carton of milk has a digital twin that includes information from when it left the farm until it arrives on the store shelf. And there's a QR code on the container of milk, and the customer can scan that code and learn the milk entire journey to the store shelf. So it's very successful. It received a lot of media attention. But the cool thing is that after this project, each of these partners pushed forward to sort of engage with one more on the dairy cooperative side, another form of technology, augmented reality, and figuring out how they might be able to use that to advance their system. And the digital twin company was moving on to sort of applying their technology in another context. The second example wasn't one of our co-innovation projects, but it's a recent partnership between General Motors and Pacific Gas and Electric. And Pacific Gas and Electric is a public utility in California. And, despite us being in Silicon Valley, their electricity goes out. David, my co-author, has experienced this himself. And so is there a way to use your electric vehicle, which is fully powered oftentimes, to power your home in the event that the electricity goes out in your home? So that collaboration is in place. I think one of the critical pieces to remember here is that we think about our traditional industry analyses or traditional forms of analyzing or strategic positioning. A dairy cooperative's industry analysis would not include a digital consultancy. A utility company's sort of approach to industry analysis might not necessarily include all the products made by automotive companies per se. Now that is shifting, right? Because they're playing a much larger role and have a large impact on the grid. But I think the point here is think very broadly beyond your traditional industry sort of players and extending out from there. 2 general forms of ecosystems, one that's platform-based, anchored to a single platform. And this is an example here is Google Cloud, right, where they're orchestrating an array of actors serving multiple industries around their own cloud platform. So they set the rules, they sort of define the rules of engagement and how those interactions will occur. The other image that I'm sharing is sort of the automotive system that's morphed into a mobility system. And here you're seeing whole different cast of actors that are now participating in this broad ecosystem. There is no one dominant player that's driving the system or sort of setting the rules for it, right? Or shaping it. Instead, we kind of have this nested system where each player, such as Ford or GM or Hyundai, might be creating their own ecosystem plays and setting up their own arrangements of partnerships. So if you are one of those organizations, the question becomes, how do you manage this? How do you navigate it? How do you influence it? How do you shape it going forward? Very challenging because each of these pieces are evolving relatively rapidly, right? From ride sharing to autonomous vehicles, we see software companies, tech companies, a whole mix here. Now, why do we care about this difference? It has significant implications for the strategic choices that you're making around ecosystem governance and orchestration. And so we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I think what's salient is to think about what type of environment is your firm operating in, because that will influence your strategic direction. Let me give you an example of a ecosystem that isn't necessarily anchored to a single or individual platform. And this comes from Rod Adner's work on innovation ecosystems, the wide lens. The citation to his book is at the bottom of the screen. I highly recommend his book. But so this was a great example of a problem with interdependencies. So Michelin comes out with the Pax Run flat tire. So the innovation was a zero pressure tire that could hold the weight of a car for an extended period of time. So a couple auto companies buy in, they sort of say, yeah, we're going to put these tires on our vehicles. The problem is that service garages, auto repair shops had no idea about how to repair this particular tire. And so what would happen is that customers would come in with a problem and, throw up their hands and say, well, okay, replace the run flats with traditional tires. So how do you kind of avoid this problem? Because 9 years after this innovation came out, there was very limited market share. The idea is that you have to sort of think broadly, figure out who are all the actors that stand between you and your end consumer that could impact your end consumer's ability to fully capture the value of your innovation, fully experience the value of your innovation. So everyone along that consumption chain end up being important. So again, this is really sort of thinking about your product or service. If you're in that kind of space, who are the other potential complementary actors or intermediaries that might affect our consumers' ability to experience the full value of our offering? So back to the sort of notion, if we think about these platform-based ecosystems, what are the core activities? And some of this work comes from some reading in ecology, where we're looking at three critical activities, mobilizing many different types of actors. Well, why different? We're keen on understanding, do they have different resources, capabilities, and knowledge base that can be combined for innovation that advances the system as a whole, right? Secondly, we want to enable their interactions. So it's not enough just to bring them together, but we want to help them figure out ways to collaborate to support knowledge creation and recombination. And a good example of this is Amazon's AWS. They set up a public innovation platform that is to encourage governments and nonprofits to collaborate over common cloud challenges. The third piece here, or I should say that part of this is all about accelerating development through interactions, right? So many of the co-innovation projects that we saw come into the platform were those that could not be finished in time at their home organization, right? So can we accelerate it through using these interactions? And the third piece here is facilitating their joint learning, right? We want to promote these reciprocal interactions so that there's joint development over time. We rarely enter into any organization rarely enters into a partnership saying that, oh, we want to leave with no new knowledge, right? Instead, you want to leave with future capabilities, additional knowledge, things that are going to help build you and go forward. Now, collectively, all three of these are critical. One, because we don't have any hierarchical control, but two, because we want this ecosystem to be generative, that is, have the capacity to produce new output from a range of different actors. And we want to be able to develop a repeated ability to do this. So not easy, but certainly critical and important to keep this going forward. So if you think about the EV space, customers are sort of not satisfied with a car that has 250, 300-mile range. No, we'd want more than that. And we want, self-driving capabilities, and we want software updates that are easy without going to a dealer or to a shop, and so on and so on. So there's always something else that we're evolving towards. So where do you start? We see this as guiding questions, and any strategic problem tends to start with what's the problem or opportunity you're trying to solve or address. So it becomes really important for you to figure out what is it that we want to accomplish. The second piece then is, who are the relevant actors? Who are the complementers and partners, and what roles will they play? What role will your organization play in this process? And when you think about those complementers and partners, the question is, who will be extractive, meaning who might increase the bottlenecks or constraints within the system, compromising its value creation, and who might actually be compensating, that is, enabling, solving interdependent problems and removing bottlenecks, but adding a lot of value. And the third piece is then, how do you design it to manage this to enable generativity? What kinds of actions will you take to do that? So this requires a bit of a mind shift within a new organization. I know that a few of the other speakers have addressed this point, that you're moving from resource control within a hierarchy to resource orchestration. And this orchestration is more about sort of kind of managing a jazz band, because we're talking about an innovation environment where there's uncertainty. So there needs to be adjustment and adaptation during that process. Internal optimization of the organization, but shifting your focus much more to facilitating these external interactions and making sure that they're effective. And then customer value certainly still matters, but it is now embedded within this overall ecosystem value that is critical to the system. So you can think about it, just think about it from this way. If you're creating a product or service within a hierarchy, then you're pushing it out to a set of audiences. And now you're playing this role of orchestrator, where you're engaging these external partners. They're creating the innovations that then layer onto your core offering or service. So back to this how point, we focus on 5 governance mechanisms and strategic choices around these. And I should say some of these are traditional mechanisms that we see in the literature on platforms in general. So how do we grow the system? How are we going to drive network effects? How are we going to drive volume? How are we going to sustain that growth? What's the degree of access? Who has access to your architecture, your technology? How much do you open up your system to these external actors? 2 other parts that are sort of more unique to the platform, which I spoke about before, were the degree of resource openness. So in the co-innovation platform, we're sort of giving a full service of resources and capabilities, but this is a continuum, right? So what services in terms of resource and capabilities will you provide to help facilitate those interactions? And then third, what incentives, both direct and indirect, will help to mobilize those actors and sustain their participation? And finally, how will value be distributed? What's that equitable value distribution model for your organization? So this is pretty basic. We know kind of what the network story is, in the sense of if we're stimulating network effects, we can use pricing subsidies on one side to help subsidize the other side. We can think about expanding the scope of products and services that are around this organic expansion around the original platform. So that's the example of Alipay. We see sort of it's this whole array of products or services. And some scholars refer to this kind of a product ecosystem that's spanned out. Another way is acquiring adjacent ecosystems. So we've seen this multiple times, whether it's Facebook and Instagram or Uber and Postmates. In this context, in the co-innovation space, we're really focused on figuring out what's the quality of participation, and it's always aligned with the strategic agenda in terms of what do we want to look at in terms of the innovation space. So with the co-innovation platform, as I mentioned, we have these variety of resources, demand side and supply side, that are provisioned to the co-innovation project partners. And in this case, you'll see this image on the left of your screen, which is identifying the 5 categories of resources. So the IT systems landscapes, making sure that they have the cloud infrastructure in place to do their work. But the platform also has a knowledge broker. So if you come to the platform and you need an additional partner, that knowledge broker can go out into the ecosystem and identify who that partner is, and then engage them in the project. Or it could be that you're midway through a project and you realize, we need new subject matter expertise. The knowledge broker can help with that as well. There's an operations management team, which helps to facilitate the execution of each project in terms of project management templates, but also runs the system as a whole. Protect and manage category is about building up that shared purpose, mutual understanding, shared agreement at the very beginning of a project, and then working on simple frame agreements or simple contracts for that co-innovation project, both addressing forward and background IP. And then the last case category is demand and showcase, which is really about once a co-innovation project has been completed, we're launching it out into the marketplace. And so how do we do that? What are some mechanisms that we're using there? Degree of access, this is pretty straightforward. This is specifying the rules for usage, right? So who has the ability to access your architecture? And there's a variety, almost sort of a continuum here, in the sense of the one extreme, we think about Google, where it's fairly open in terms of creating apps for that platform. But Baidu's autonomous vehicle platform initially also had programming and app development as their architectures were open, but the final product was closed, right? If we think about the right-hand side, this more curated approach, certainly Apple iOS has a much more curated approach in terms of the app development than the Google Android platform. And then the co-innovation platform, a key element here is whether that co-innovation project aligns with the strategic objectives of the platform and its parent organization. So you can think about different ways to sort of decide where in this continuum you would fit, what types of choices you would make. They would align with the strategy the firm is pursuing. Now back to this degree of openness. And we see this as a continuum moving from hands off all the way to hands on. In the traditional sense, you know, if you're eBay, you're giving a toolkit to buyers or users of your platform to sort of, here's how you can post a product onto the platform, right? You don't give someone, no one's on the phone telling you how to do this, right? Apple iOS is a little bit to the right on this spectrum because there is an opportunity, as I dug into their app developer space, where some app developers can get access to a live person for tech support for about an hour. And then we shift all the way to the right-hand side and the hands-on model, which is the co-innovation platform model, where there's a fully integrated set of services, resources, and capabilities to enable the collaboration events to occur, right? And let me give you an example of one of these categories, and that is demo and showcase. And David was intimately involved in these two projects. The demo and showcase, building awareness once a co-innovation project has been completed, involves both briefs, blogs, use cases, videos of a trade show hosts hosting these co-innovation project partners at trade shows, all kinds of things, but also physical demos. And these were created in the lab by David and his team. And this first one is for a mining project, which was aimed at reducing harm to miners while they're working in the mine. It's a fully functioning demo. The little orange elements that you see there are individuals. They have the mine itself is fully equipped with sensors, both on the mine and on the physical equipment, because there's large, dangerous physical equipment in these spaces. The goal was to try to reduce the amount of time it took to notify a miner that they're in harm's way. So these two companies co-innovated on what was referred to as a mine safe smartwatch, and they used IoT sensors on the mine and on the equipment, Wi-Fi and software, and this was controlled from a centralized system, and basically testing it out to see what's the efficacy, how quickly can we get that information to the miner to get them out of harm's way. The second example is an oil and gas project, co-innovation project, and this project was with Dell EMC, Pixel Velocity, MTEL, and several SAP business units. And the goal was replicating problems on an oil rig. And so the technology used here was an integration of IoT, edge computing, and machine learning to anticipate and solve problems. It provided real-time situational awareness and the ability to act on patterns and anti-patterns of data. So this particular demo enthralled audiences, and David continues to get sort of comments and questions about, hey, can we see that demo again? Can we use it again? We'd like to take a look at it. The fourth piece here is, well, once you've mobilized them, they're there, how do you sustain their participation? And initially sort of getting those complementers to engage with your platform-based ecosystem is, make it easy. Don't change the rules up frequently. Make it easy for them to do this. So this is an image from Apple's developer program. But more important, I think, than some of the direct incentives are these indirect incentives that emerge. And one of the common outcomes of our interviews with executives in co-innovation projects was that they were surprised that they also learned a lot about how to innovate by working with the platform. That was one of the big takeaways from their perspective. While they learned from partners, they also learned from other co-innovation project partners that were operating with the platform, or engaging in platform and co-innovation projects with the platform. This was exposure to new relationships. It led to novel connections and net new projects. For small to medium-sized organizations, this also had a huge amount of exposure within the ecosystem. And so this helped them to build more legitimacy and reputation, and helped to sort of pave their way in other spaces with interactions with other actors within the platform itself. So let me give you an example of one of these novel opportunities that emerged. And in this case, it was a nonprofit in South Africa, Elephants, Rhinos, and People. And they have a stat on their site, which was that over the last 60 years, 4.5 million elephants have been killed, about 4 per hour. So how can we solve this problem? How can we reduce this poaching? They didn't have the technology, so they connected with the co-innovation platform, and the solution was geotags on animals, which is not a new technology, has been used before, but they're using that in combination with drones and high fidelity cameras. And all that information is sent to an AI algorithm, which does a threat assessment. And that threat assessment is fed back to the ERP team. If there is a need if there's a threat present, they send another drone out as well as a team out. There was an example when we were working on the book, there was an example they had posted where 8 rescued elephants, started to wander off the reserve in the wee hours of the morning. The team was alerted at 4:15 a.m. and within 45 minutes, they were on site. And within 4 hours, all those elephants were safe. So unique combinations, things that emerge through different interactions that and exposure to different types of technologies. We think about this value creation and distribution. I think the key piece here is to think about it as being equitable. I think we've all heard the stories about complementers feeling they're being exploited or used by a particular platform provider. The mindset for the co-innovation model is really working with the platform as opposed to working for the platform. And that sort of rings through everything, including that value distribution aspect. So as you recall, when I showed the model, partners capture the value that they create. There is agreement about backward and foreground IP. One of the issues at the beginning of this setting up those contracts is much about, look, we're planning on a simple contract. We're not going to sort of have this long, detailed approach that you typically might have to alliances. And so that stage setting and that expectation from the very beginning helps to frame this up. I know I'm running out of time. If you want to take a look at this more, this is in chapter 2 of our book. And of course, there's a variety of ways to think about the revenue generation in each of these models. Let me end with going back to the issue about where do we start, right? What problem are you trying to solve or address? Who are those relevant partners, relevant complementary actors? What role will they play? Are there opportunities to create new value via interactions with different actors in your space? Right. And then finally, are there interdependencies that you've overlooked that limit your customers' ability to fully capture the value of your innovations? When we think about this, it's much more about value creation. And this is another area that I'm exploring, which is sort of understanding a theory of value creation within organizations. It's not about the individual actors in this context, but about their interactions. So that tends to be the focus. Strategic choices should align with your firm's strategic objectives. And this notion of working with, fostering shared purpose and trust is enabled by a number of practices that the co-innovation system put in place. Simple, adaptable collaboration agreements, resource openness, direct and indirect incentives, and equitable value distribution. So let me stop there. We would love to hear any questions or comments that you might have and open it up for discussion.
Thanks very much, Tammy. And you crammed a lot into that. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
And I will never drink milk in Germany in the same way again. It struck me, that example, the dairy cooperative in Germany, and it struck me that it's a cooperative. I wonder if cooperatives and kind of alternative organizations are more open or easier converts to the idea of ecosystems. That was a question as much as an observation.
Yeah, no, I think that would make sense to me. I mean, that there would be more of a willingness because they are already collaborating with a variety of groups. They've set up an infrastructure already to foster that collaboration and more, they're motivated to collaborate, right? So I think that's a big plus there.
Yeah.
Social and global motivations and incentives other than just pure business profit.
And I liked the Michelin example of the tires development. And is that a common problem? That, I mean, basically they planned an ecosystem, but the ecosystem they developed wasn't really big enough because it didn't include the garages. And well, I think, is that a common problem that people imagine ecosystems, but they're not quite as ambitious as they might be?
David, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, it can be a problem. I mean, if you're going to work with your ecosystem, it's nice to tell them that you want to work with them. And so in Tammy's example, they had, for whatever reason, not connected with the service garages. For what reasons? It's hard to say. They didn't have budget to do training and demonstrations, to introduce the product and to send sample product over to every single garage that would take interest in it. There's probably numerous factors there, but you don't. But see, you want to understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish with, ecosystem co-innovation strategy. Because Tammy and I have often spoken about, this notion of, both exploitative co-innovation and exploratory co-innovation, and there's room and context for both to exist. But someone that really we talk about, where do I start? How do I make this work? You first want to understand, well, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? And I would hope that most would find that the lean should be more towards exploratory, because I think that's where you're more open, more ideas. There's a lot more continuous learning that's going on. It's more of a continuum than just, exploitation, where we're going to integrate these two functions or features in these two, different software programs and address a specific industry's, problem. So it's at the end of the day, yes, there was some integration work and some innovation, perhaps, but it was more about just sort of exploiting the capabilities of existing software to then broaden or extend reach into other markets that you might not otherwise go into otherwise.
Like near the end, Tammy mentioned the company that created the ecosystem, and they were surprised that they learned to innovate. And which therein lies the problem, doesn't it? That they're surprised that sharing knowledge and involving other people is going to help innovation. Yeah.
I think it's part of it is that we have the kind of traditional model of like, well, we hire employees, they have the knowledge, they're within our boundaries, we should know what to do. And I'm recalling back, I did a project with Texas Instruments a number of different years ago, but they created a word not invented here, but we did it anyway because they were trying to force their semiconductor fab locations to go outside for innovations. They were even trying to encourage them to talk to one another, to share innovations, right? So it's really this mindset shift to more of, kind of Chesbro's work on open innovation. And there's been a great deal of work that's starting to integrate these two streams.
And your point about the quality of the interactions strikes me as being really central to everything you talked about, that if you haven't got that, you've got nothing.
The interactions are hugely important, and it's sort of this notion of over communicating is not a bad thing among co-innovation project team members. And as Tammy pointed out, in our platform environment, we had multiple partners working with the company on different innovation projects, but they would get exposed or introduced to each other at a partner event or a customer event, and they would say, hey, you're working on IoT and you're trying to pull information and capture data into an SAP HANA database. That's what we're trying to do. And start sharing ideas and exchanging, and then they find out, oh, we could extend our value chain if we brought elements from your project and our project together. So this is very real. Now you have to be mindful or careful of, sort of hollowing out the original opportunities everyone's chasing after to go chase after the next shiny thing. But as Tammy mentioned, from a platform perspective, it's a bit of a continuum. You're promoting and trying to enable serial co-innovators to participate on the platform and to keep building value with it.
And the quality of interaction starts internally as well, because you always think of the ecosystem as an external thing, but if you don't have the quality of interactions internally, you have no chance, I guess.
That's fair to say, yes.
And
I think David spent a lot of time, there's a portion of time that's spent at that framing piece, at that mutual agreement piece, where it is devoting attention to say, this is not like an alliance that you've created, that your traditional sort of alliance framework back at your home organization. This is a bit different. And so that sort of expectation setting piece ends up being really, really critical. Who's going to commit what resources to the project and guarantee that commitment?
Early on, you mentioned equitable value distribution. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because I wasn't quite sure. Because can you just explain a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. So I think, each partner comes in, they have a set of resources they're committing to the project, but there's some outcome from that project, and then who benefits from that outcome, right? And if there's value to be had, or even sort of economic value to be had, who walks away with that economic value? And so we know in the app space, right? So for iOS or Android, it's complementary. The platform owners capture about, it varies now, but 30% roughly, say, right? In this space, it's a different story. The participants with the co-innovation platform paid a simple fee to engage with the platform, but then they walk away with what they create, right? So they have an agreement, they're walking away with they have an agreement to share whatever forward IP or that they have created in that project. And so the platform doesn't take that from them. And that's the notion that we're working with versus working for the platform. David, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, what we did was separate out the notion that, well, first we just are interested to figure out what co-innovation is possible. What can we do together? So it's project-based work. It's driven by a statement of work between all the participants. What's not in that contract, because it's focused just on the project, is how are you going to resell the solution? How are you going to support that solution? There's lots of different avenues you could take. That it could be a solution extension or some other go-to-market program. It could be an OEM sort of arrangement, but the focus on the innovation is first to cast it as a project. Just get everyone hands in and focused on trying to build that solution. We found that it just muddies the water when other stakeholders and subject matter experts start to look at that bigger picture of, oh, how's it going to be supported and sold, and they end up rat holing or breaking away from the attention that needs to be paid, just to make sure that the project can prove that that the idea is good, and that it's something that a market or a customer is willing to pay for.
I really like the idea of generative ecosystems. And I suppose that's getting away from the idea that ecosystems are kind of project-based or problem-based, that they're a bit bigger. They have a life beyond the immediate issue.
Yeah, and I think that can get easily overlooked when we're just looking at, there's a lot of empirical work because there's a lot of data on apps, right? So there's a lot of empirical in these kind of network spaces, but most of our organizations aren't in those locations. Many organizations aren't a platform, a two-sided or a three-sided, multi-sided platform. They're in a different context, like the mobility ecosystem. And so how do you navigate that, right? How do you act there? And so really focusing on developing this repeated ability to co-innovate and to manage those interactions and create value through those interactions, manage those interdependencies and kill off bottlenecks is a skill, we might think about as an ecosystem specific skill that needs to be part of the story.
And this is about creating deliberately and strategically creating co-innovation platforms, ecosystems. Can they grow accidentally and organically? Do they just emerge sometimes?
I think you had Doug Hanna on. He's done some work on an ecosystem emergence. Well, David, do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I was going to say, there's always emerging tech, and that has the chance of sort of, spawning a new ecosystem around it. I can remember when, IoT first became a thing in 2004, 2005. Everyone was trying to jump in. How can I use sensors for, like you said, edge computing and real-time situation awareness, or how can I monitor shoppers with devices in the store and see that they're in the aisle to buy nails, so I can send a coupon to their phone, hey, 10% off nails. All these sorts of things, right? We're just sort of coming at people very quickly. Oh my God, the technology exists, we can do it. Oh, not so fast. We really have to sort of absorb and understand and make sense of that technology, and then quickly understand what the business value is from deploying and implementing that technology.
I think the language is interesting around governance and orchestration, because they kind of rest uneasily in my mind that governance and orchestration aren't quite, and Tammy, you mentioned jazz orchestration, which I was kind of thinking is, because I kind of know what you mean, but it kind of rests uneasily with governance. And then you talk about a lack of hierarchy. There's got to be acceptance that it's a different sort of arrangement and lack of hierarchy. But then isn't an orchestra hierarchy quite strictly delineated? And the guy with the baton is in charge. So it's kind of there's an interesting language, because I know what you mean, but I'm kind of trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it gets complex really quickly, right? So if you're an organization that's really trying to make this shift, it fundamentally changes multiple things within the organization, multiple processes, right? So you're sort of, and I agree. I mean, I think our metaphors, I think Liz Altman, believe her Annals article is really focused on shepherding, right? That's part of the approach as opposed to orchestration. And then there's a lot of literature that talks about orchestration where it's, the descriptions are kind of hand waving. So another project that I'm working on right now is saying, well, okay, if you're going to do this, what are the human capital skills that you need to make it happen? How do you execute? Who do you need in your organization? How does their role change? And how do you train them sort of to have this kind of mindset and go in that direction? Because it isn't, that word, and the word I think gets used a lot in different ways, but I think what we want to see is we want to enable adjustable, adaptable projects, right? So that it's not, okay, we're going to hear the project, here's the plan, we're going to go through 10 steps and boom, it's done. It doesn't happen that way. There's uncertainty that evolves. We need a new partner coming in. We need new subject matter expertise. So how do we make that happen? And the orchestration piece, in the case of the co-innovation platform, David played this role. He also played the role of knowledge broker. So there was many projects where he they got midway through, oh, we need another piece of knowledge, or we need another technology. Can you help us find that? And so he would navigate that space. Right. So
I guess hand waving is how the pyramids were built eventually. So when you talk about these ideas, what do organizations and people struggle with? What surprises you about what they struggle with, and what's the most common thing they really struggle with when you're talking about this?
I venture a comment here, Tammy. I think the things that we struggle with is that you'll have, from sort of the engineering development side of the house, the actors, the participants that come in and work on a co-innovation project, they very much, I think, in my experience, have been attuned to solving a problem, understanding how the product fit that needs to exist in the market for the solution to have uptake and to satisfy and delight customers. But I often found that sort of the business focused managers, the field facing teams, sales and so forth, or even business development, they tend to fall more into that realm of, I've got a deal to close in 90 days, or I have several deals I want to close in 90 days. What can I get done right now? And how do I take advantage of this relationship so us as the focal firm can go off and close these deals with these partners, without these partners? That's really what the focus is. So it's more of a short-term sort of play and viewpoint than understanding that it's longer term approach to trying to come up with innovative ideas that resonate with customers and that they want to buy.
Oh, and where does your research go now? What are you working on together now? That was a loaded question, actually, because you might not be.
I think so. We know that we can expand. We're hoping to expand some of the areas of exploration here. David's working on some ideas. It's certainly one of the pieces that we didn't speak about as much within the context of the book was regulation, right? And we know that there's sort of how do we manage the regulatory environment in this context, right? So there's on my end, I'm sort of thinking about what are the types of skills we need, what's underlying the orchestration model, and how do we execute that within organizations. And then at the other end is like, okay, so how do we position, how do we manage the regulatory environment? How do we collaborate with regulations? Some of my other work looks at the effects of deregulation. It's been around the notion of sort of trying to manage that process. It's been around for a long time, but we're just seeing it increasingly more so in the tech space, right? So it's a very critical element.
It is. We'll see more of it. I mean, when you think about the electric, takeoff and landing vehicles, that technology that's going to, spawn air taxis that make these really short commuter trips, from, one location to the next. That's going to provoke a lot of regulation, from FAA and other safety, concerned agencies, and so that no question, we'll see a lot more of this, and regulation is going to factor heavily for some of these technologies that they're going to change the world, but at the same time, we've got to keep the world safe as we roll them out.
I think the other piece that I'm interested in that lends to the ecosystem part is that in strategy, we've looked a lot about explaining differences in performance or superior performance among competitors. And here we're really sort of looking at how do we explain differences in value creation, right? As kind of the bedrock of underlying those differences and outcomes. So that's
yeah. So because kind of governance and regulation, contracting, they seem to be the next frontier for ecosystems, making sense of them, or making all those things work. And going back to your metaphor, it's a bit like musical scores, isn't it? You're developing a musical score for the way the ecosystems develop.
Yes.
Yeah, there's lots to look forward to. There's a huge amount of knowledge that needs to be developed to fully understand and take advantage of the ecosystem opportunities.
Yeah, and I think in this space, there's a great opportunity for more collaboration between sort of, the traditional academic scholar kind of work and business, because in many ways, some of those organizations are further ahead than our work, because it takes a while for us some of our stuff to get into the journals. And so what I found working with David is incredibly enlightening in terms of, the types of dynamics that he observed on a daily basis, the types of issues that he worked with partners, learning more about other players within the broader ecosystem. And so there's always amazing stories to sort of, how do we unpack this? What does it mean in terms of practice?
Yeah, and I wonder if there are cultural differences in approach to co-innovation and ecosystems. It always struck me that obviously Silicon Valley is built around ecosystems to a large extent, but I wonder if in different countries, if there's different cultural attitudes. Just an idea to throw into your research.
I think it's a great question. David, do you?
David looked as though he was poised to give an answer.
Very careful about the answer.
Yeah.
No, I think culture plays a role. I mean, when you think about you said earlier, talking about this notion of not invented here. I mean, universally, probably engineers around the world, what do they like? They like to build things and fix things and break things and fix them and so forth. And so, and engineers are measured on their ability to write papers and to, create, solutions and so forth. And if you start pushing those engineers into working with others and bringing ideas in from the outside, I would imagine it's a little bit threatening, and maybe that differs from culture to culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we should forget about the engineers and embrace jazz musicians as the future. So we're out of time. Tammy and David, thank you very much. Tammy and David's book is called Co-Innovation Platforms. It's recommended and challenging and serious reading, but very important subjects, really nicely explained. Thank you very much for joining us. So Co-Innovation Platforms, we recommend heartily. And thank you everyone in the audience for joining us. And thank you, Tammy and David. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you. Wonderful.
And thanks to everyone.